Carlos Sainz is the one that got away from the lucrative Red Bull Driver Academy. He forced a move to Renault on loan midway through the 2017 season, but was then snubbed for the 2019 Red Bull seat, as he went to McLaren instead. And we all know what happened next for that second Red Bull seat. So should Red Bull regret letting Sainz go? Let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. Sainz at Toro Rosso. The 2015 Toro Rosso lineup was in hindsight absolutely excellent, and it was quite clear to see that despite Sainz and Verstappen being rookies, they were both drivers with a huge amount of potential. The challenge is that before this time, the drivers in the Toro Rosso seat tended to be temporary, with drivers often being there for no longer than 2 seasons or so before being moved on for the next young talent. Many drivers have been moved on, including the likes of Jean-Eric Vergne, Jaime Alguersuari and Sebastian Buemi in the seasons before Sainz and Verstappen made their debuts with that team. So the pressure was on for these two, knowing that they would likely be competing to keep themselves on the F1 grid and be the driver that Red Bull would subsequently back should there be a desire to promote one of them into the top team. And given that team had just promoted Daniel Ricciardo after he'd been in the Toro Rosso for just a single season, there was perhaps more of an opportunity to get that move than there had been in previous years. That first season though was tough for Sainz for 2 reasons. The first of these was that he was up against Max Verstappen, the driver that had been handed his Formula 1 debut at the age of just 17, and was probably the hottest prospect that the grid had seen since Lewis Hamilton in 2007. So already, Sainz had to overcome the hype of his teammate in his rookie year, which would have almost certainly added some pressure. The second reason Sainz's debut season was tough was due to a long run of bad luck. There's no doubt that the Spaniard had the worst of the reliability issues in the Toro Rosso garage. His run of 4 DNFs between Austria and Belgium came during a run where Verstappen scored 20 points, and this was 4 of 7 non-finishes across the 19-race season due to reliability issues compared to Verstappen's 2. At the race in Hungary where Verstappen finished 4th, Sainz retired with a fuel pressure issue with less than 10 laps to go. At the time, he was running pretty close to Verstappen and could have easily achieved a large haul of points on that occasion. This race in Hungary is a good example of the Spaniard's poor luck over the course of his debut year. So as a result, it made the gap between Sainz and Verstappen look much worse than the gap in their performances across the year, as Sainz scored 18 points to Verstappen's 49. Some positives for the year though include the fact that Sainz did indeed outqualify Verstappen over the course of the year, and he didn't have any DNFs that were caused by his own mistakes. So he was definitely showing some signs of excellence early on, even if he was in the shadow of his younger teammate. 2016 was a significant improvement on the previous season, despite the fact that the Toro Rosso car got worse relative to their rivals as they were running a 2015 spec Ferrari power unit. But regardless, Sainz had an excellent year, maximising his strong car in the early part of the season with consistent point-scoring finishes. Not only this, but when he had the poor-performing car in the latter stages, he still managed 6th-place finishes in the USA and Brazil, the latter being a race in incredibly challenging conditions, showing his driver's skill. Another point that Sainz proved in 2016 was that he was able to beat Daniel Ricciardo, the driver that was relegated from Red Bull after a handful of races into the season, with Sainz scoring 42 points in the races that they were in the same car to Ricciardo's 4. Although this could be explained by the fact that Ricciardo may have lost his motivation, having been replaced. And this brings us on to 2017. Traditionally, the Red Bull Academy setup would put Sainz at risk here despite his excellent performances. He may have had reliability challenges in 2015, but historically the team hadn't been particularly sympathetic with Jean-Eric Vergne losing his seat despite similar challenges. So Sainz was aware that to build his reputation further, it was unlikely that he could remain in the Toro Rosso seat for too much longer. So in 2017, once again, Sainz was delivering consistent and strong performances, including a best ever result of 4th in Singapore. But his relationship with Red Bull was souring. He knew that the team couldn't offer him anything more than a seat at Toro Rosso, considering that they had Verstappen and Ricciardo delivering at the top team. So Sainz pushed for a move away, and given Renault were interested in the driver, the switch was actually arranged to happen later in the year, in what was actually a loan move for the driver. It was arranged as part of a deal which saw Toro Rosso switch to the Honda engines for 2018, allowing McLaren to switch to the Renault engines for that season. The move was pushed for by Sainz, and this is understandable. He knew his prospects were limited, and the team was unlikely to give him a car that could help him move up the order. So moving away was sensible for him, and so Red Bull used it as an opportunity to test the Honda power unit in the Toro Rosso car. So it was arguably a very sensible decision for both parties. But before I take a look at whether this was a mistake from Red Bull, I want to take a moment to ask you to consider subscribing to Behind the Drive. We're so close to the 2022 season, and I'll be sharing my thoughts and opinions throughout, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out. Thanks. Sainz's departure from the Red Bull Academy. Sainz's move to Renault was a loan move, but Sainz has since revealed that he knew at the point that he left the Toro Rosso team that he was also breaking ties with the Red Bull team. So that season in 2018, Sainz was really driving to secure his future in the sport. He had Red Bull ties, but they were certainly fraying, and subsequently needed to ensure he was either convincing Renault to retain him or putting himself in a position where another team could sign him. And this is interesting in itself. Sainz broke the mould of Toro Rosso drivers that were dropped from the team and the sport. He had at least tried something different by moving to Renault. Having said this, Sainz and Renault were at the centre of the next major driver change up on the grid as the French team achieved the signature of Daniel Ricciardo to move from Red Bull to Renault for 2019. This meant that not only was Sainz's position at Renault for 2019 in jeopardy, but there was also an opportunity at Red Bull. And this is where arguably Red Bull made their mistake. Sainz was a driver with 4 years experience in the sport and was still in some way associated with Red Bull, and there was an opportunity for the team to bring him back into the Red Bull setup. Compared to the eventual driver Pierre Gasly, there was no doubt that Sainz would likely do the better job with Red Bull. There were rumours that Verstappen had vetoed the revival of the partnership that they had at Toro Rosso, but for me, I think this is probably a bit far-fetched. But subsequently, Sainz signed for McLaren, and therefore it looked increasingly likely that it would be Pierre Gasly who would get that opportunity in the Red Bull. So at the point of the split, Sainz's relationship with the Red Bull team was drifting apart anyway, and had been for some time. He also had a great opportunity to race with McLaren, replacing Fernando Alonso, and with them he would be able to help revive the team from the lows of their last few years, and also have the opportunity to be the lead driver at one of the most successful teams in Formula One's history. There's no doubt that the opportunity at McLaren was great for Sainz, but a return to Red Bull would have certainly offered an opportunity to race at the front of the grid sooner than the McLaren project. But evidently, the Austrian team had put their trust in Gasly for that role. The outcome. But this is where it all went a bit wrong for Red Bull. While Sainz was incredibly impressive at McLaren in 2019, Pierre Gasly in the Red Bull was far from it, and even got dropped for a rookie driver, Alex Albon, midway through the season. So I think we can be quite confident that Sainz would have been more likely to be trusted in the Red Bull given his extra experience on the F1 grid. Meanwhile, Gasly has since stated that once he made a mistake in the winter testing, some of the team started to turn against him. Subsequently, after a tough start to his Red Bull stint, the media wrote him off and were adding additional pressure. And Gasly's also said that he has felt he wasn't really supported and treated the same way as others there have been. It's impossible to know for sure whether Carlos Sainz would have been treated differently by the Red Bull team or the media, as we don't necessarily know the reasons why Gasly was treated in this way. But in my opinion, a driver with 4 years experience in the sport would have most likely been trusted more than one who only had 1 year of experience. Another point to add here was traditionally Red Bull have recruited drivers that had very quickly established themselves as the lead driver, or at least able to compete. Thinking about it, Vettel entered the team and was immediately the fastest. Then you had Daniel Ricciardo in to replace Mark Webber, and he then subsequently established himself as the best. Kvyat had a short stint at the team where he did beat Ricciardo in 2015, and then of course Verstappen came in and quickly established himself as able to compete with Ricciardo as well. So the team at Red Bull expected drivers to deliver as soon as they joined them. And I suppose that's the point of having a second team. They need to ensure their drivers are prepared to step up into the Red Bull, and that's why they promote from within. So should Red Bull regret letting Carlos Sainz leave their program when they perhaps needed him the most? Well, I think they made a mistake. Had they promoted Sainz, I think it would have been quite clear that the Red Bull setup could have been even stronger than it is today, especially when you consider how Sainz has gone from strength to strength with McLaren and Ferrari. However, should they regret it? I don't think they should. At the end of the day, they've now finally replaced Ricciardo with Sergio Perez, and that's undoubtedly been a success. Perhaps you could argue that if Sainz was there, he'd have been more likely to win the Constructors' Championship in 2021, but you could equally argue that Sainz might have been too close to Verstappen, and potentially the pair of them would have tripped each other up, and thus not been able to win the driver's title. In the end, I think Red Bull went through a tough time finding Ricciardo's replacement, and yet the best option was passed up in my opinion. But they've now sourced the best replacement in Sergio Perez, and if you want to find out why he's the best, make sure you watch this video.